Today's Bible teaching is entitled Three Ways That You Know Dealing with Relationships is Just Like Dealing with Fruit. Once again, today's Bible teaching is entitled Three Ways That You Know That Dealing with Relationships is Just Like Dealing with Fruit. And point number one is dealing with relationships can be like dealing with good looking fruit. One bite of it can forever change the course of your life. You got to know the fruit and know its energy. He looked so handsome and buff in those fitted shirts and Oxfords. Why would he want someone like me? That's what came across your mind, right? Because you had low self-esteem and low self-worth from growing up in your childhood. So this question always became what? It was always there in the back of your mind. It was kept trying to come to the forefront, right? You already had low self-esteem. You already had low self-worth, right? You ignored his energy. You ignored the famous lines that he used with you and that he used with every woman that he'd been with, right? I never found another woman like you. There's no other woman in the world that's like you. You got the most beautiful this and that and other, the hair, your face, your skin, all of this. And so, like, when you think about that, when somebody tells you something, they give you all of these compliments and all of this flattery. It's like you got to stop and think to yourself. So, you mean to tell me nobody else, absolutely no one else, has nice skin, beautiful hair, can braid hair like I do, or whatever it is he's complimenting you on? Nobody in the world, nobody else in the world can do that. You got to stop and think to yourself, something is off. The energy is off. And when the energy is off, it's that intoxicating gaslighting and love bombing energy. But you get so caught up that you do what? You ignore that energy, right? And he probably told every single woman that, right? Baby, ain't nobody else in the world like you. I've never met anybody else like you. It's always this one line, right? Where it's comparing you to all the other women that so-called he's been with, right? That he's so-called been with, right? He has that mysterious, sexy, smooth side of him, right? Those smooth words, right? And that's to help to cover up what's really going on. And in the beginning, you thought he was mysterious and it was kind of sexy because of the fact you didn't know a whole lot about him. And he only told you enough to trauma bond you to him, right? Tell you enough of his trauma so you can tell him what? Enough of your trauma, and you guys can do what? You guys can what? Have a trauma bond there going on. So he only gave you just enough information to pull you in. And then once he pulled you in and sucked you in, then he went there with you, right? Getting all that information from you. And then he started pulling back everything he was telling you, right? And then Psalm 55:21, David said, the words of his mouth, and this is the King James Version, were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. This, my best friend, betrayed his best friends. His life betrayed his word. All my life, I've been charmed by his speech, never dreaming he'd turn on me. His words, which were music to my ears, turned to daggers in my heart. That sounds like some intense stuff going on, don't it? And then, so what happens is he says, pile your troubles on God's shoulders. He'll carry your load. He'll help you out. He'll never let good people topple into ruin, right? And so David was hurt. This was his best friend that did this to him. This wasn't like it was somebody that he didn't know. This was his best friend that turned on him, right? And so what happens is that even in scripture with Eve, and the serpent came to her over in Genesis 3:1-7, it says, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. So he was lying to her, right? And it lets you know he came in what, that gaslighting spirit, because it says they set up the setting of the story. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the beasts of the field. So that lets you know he came there with that gaslighting energy on her, right? She gonna start talking about touching it, the Lord, and tell him anything about touching it. But by the time the serpent got through with her, she started distorting the truth of what God said to her, right? And that's what happens when people come to you in that gaslighting spirit. They will distort the truth. The next thing you know, you're saying stuff that you don't have any idea what it is you're saying. You're just saying stuff. Stuff is just spilling out of your mouth. You're telling too much, right? And so then he said, for God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be open. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths, right? All it did was take one night and you were hooked on him like white on rice. The package looked so good, right? But it was the death of you on so many levels. And you had no idea what his agenda was, right? You knew what yours was. You thinking you're going to find a man, right? You thinking because of your low self-esteem and low self-worth that his enoughness, so you thought was going to what? Override and provide you with the enoughness that you needed, right? But you didn't know you had to get that from the Lord, right? You were trying to get it from your parents. You were trying to get it because of being invalidated and being minimized, right? And all of that kind of jazz and being deflected upon and projected upon. You didn't know that you didn't have what it was you needed before you went into the relationship with this man. So now you're in a relationship with him and it's just toxic, right? One night. And that's all it took for you to be hooked on him, like I said, like white on rice. But the package looked so good. You never would have thought that would happen, right? The package looked so good, right? But what ended up happening in the long run is it became emotional, spiritual, psychological connection to this man, right? With this fruit that was over God, right? You thought he was a good piece of fruit, right? But he was connected to the spirit of perversion, right? Remember, the lust for always leads to a took for, and it always leads to a soul tie door. Unchecked cravings always lead to lust, right? Number two, the second point is dealing with relationships can be like dealing with a bad apple. There's only so much you can cut off to create boundaries before there's nothing left of value to partake in. And what happens is that as a kid, my grandmother, my mother, I'm looking at the apples. I'm like, oh, this apple is bad. I need to throw it away. This no good. No, girl. My grandmother, girl, take a knife and just cut the brown parts off, girl. And so I was cutting off so many brown parts. And on some apples, by the time I got through cutting off the brown spots with the knife, there wasn't nothing left of the apple, right? It was nothing really of value. It was a little bitty, almost nothing but the core left with the seeds. Then there was other apples where she was right. That's all I had to do was just cut the brown pieces off and I can go ahead and eat it. And it's the same thing in relationships with people. Sometimes all we got to do is just cut off a few brown spots, set up a few boundaries. Those brown spots represent the boundaries, and then we're done. There's other people where those brown spots are so embedded in that apple, there's nothing left of value that you can have with them in a relationship, right? Oh, we can't talk about this because I know as soon as I start bringing that up, she's going to try to one-up me. It's going to be a one-up in competition like with Leah and Rachel, and the baby making and them making themselves baby making factories, right? We can't talk about this, right? If I say this, he gonna get upset. He gonna explode. He gonna start throwing things, right? If I say this, he gonna just start bursting out in anger and wrath, and he's gonna do that to get me to be quiet. So I better not talk about this. Or if I say this, I know she's gonna end up starting to have all of these put downs towards me because she don't know how to deal with her feelings. So all of a sudden, the way she's gonna deal with them is what? Judge, criticize, condemn, and have all these put downs and belittlement towards me. So what do you talk about? What do you do together? Hardly nothing, right? If I mention this, they're going to start gaslighting me and projecting all the trauma and drama that they've been through in their life onto me. If I tell him or her what happened, it's going to be minimized. It's going to be invalidated, right? And then what? My experiences are going to be what? Shut down and put us out of the door like they never happened. But how much are you going to cut away before there's nothing else to cut away? There's nothing but the core and the seeds of the apple that's left. That's all that's left. And you don't want to eat the seeds. Eating so many of them seeds is like eating poison, right? That's what's down in those seeds that's been planted inside of them. There's nothing you can do about that. They have to go to therapy. They have to be willing to go and do their own work, right? If it's two people in a relationship, but you catering to one person, what do you have left? Nothing, right? Because everything you say to them going to turn into a one-up in competition. But you got to watch what you say. You can't be vulnerable, right? What you going to talk about now, right? And Leah and Rachel, they couldn't even have a relationship with sisters. They both were left wounded, right? And Rachel telling Jacob, give me children or else I die. She almost basically manifested rather her own ending. She ended up dying, giving birth to Benjamin. She wanted to name him Benoni, right? Child of sorrows. And Jacob said, we're going to name him Benjamin, right? So she almost like manifested in a sense what was going to end up happening to her, right? That baby making competition and that lust for a child was it was basically the death of her in so many words. And Leah, she participated in the baby making competition, right? She wasn't loved anymore by Jacob. He loved Rachel. There was no relationship with him and her, right? Next point. Dealing with the aftermath of unhealthy relationships can be like the aftermath of eating bad fruit. You're bitter for a while, but it takes hard work and perseverance to trust and try another one again. That relationship left you bitter. That narcissistic abuse cycle, it left you bitter. It left you traumatized, dramatized, and every other kind of task, right? In the outside, it looked like a good idea on the outside, right? Apples, grapes, strawberries. You spent all that money on this fruit and you eat it. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so bitter and so awful. And then you're mad because you'd wasted money, right? You thought the grass was greener, so you moved to the other side of town. Guess what happened? The kids got buck wild. The marriage is falling apart. Your house then got broken into so many times you lost count of. Naomi thought it was a good idea to move to Moab, right? It was her worst nightmare, but she didn't know that, right? She did not know that. She thought moving, her and her husband, right? They thought moving was going to be the answer, them and their sons. They thought moving was going to be the answer to their famine. They left Bethlehem, which is entitled the House of Bread, and went to Moab, right? And we know how God felt about Moab, but they thought the grass was green on the other side. Well, at least we'll give this a chance. Not thinking about God was going to provide because house of bread, right? They forgot where they were living. And sometimes we forget our names and what they stand for, right? We start calling ourselves something else. I'm going to read the story to you real quick. It says, during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and two sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The name of the two sons was Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the fields of Moab and settled there. Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and she was left with her two sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the second one was named Ruth. After they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And the woman was left without her two children and without her husband. So this was a lot of trauma that she exhibited, right? That she had to go through and experience. And then what happens is both of her two daughter-in-laws, they have a decision of whether they're going to go with her or go back to their homeland. Ruth decides to go with Naomi. Orpah decides to go ahead and go back to her homeland, right? And so what happened is Naomi and Ruth are going back to Bethlehem. And this is what ends up happening, right? I'm going to go down a few verses. I'm going to read what ends up happening once they go back. The two of them traveled until they came to Bethlehem. When they entered Bethlehem, the whole town was excited about their arrival, and the local women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara." And Mara means bitter. She answered, "For the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth, the Moabitess. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So the Lord had already brought provision back to Bethlehem, back to House of Bread, right? He had them to remember their name. Naomi had to go back and remember where she come from. That she had left House of Bread to go to Moab, a place like that, right? And so what happened is Ruth stayed with Naomi, her mother-in-law. Orpah left, right? They moved back. They moved back to the House of Bread. The ladies were happy to see them, to see Naomi, right? Naomi had been changed by life, by trauma, and by the cards she had been dealt. It seemed like common sense at first for her and her husband and sons to leave, right? But in the end, it wasn't. God still blessed Naomi by giving her a kinsman redeemer through Ruth to have grandchildren, and her outlook changed. Your outlook can change too. You don't have to remain in a state of bitterness. You do not have to what? Keep cutting off that apple, cutting off the apple, cutting off the brown spots of the apple till there's nothing left of value between you and the other person in the relationship, right? Remember, you are enough. Reclaim your power, soul, and identity today. I want to challenge you to reclaim the soul, the power, soul, and identity of your calling. Grab your keys to the kingdom, get your inheritance. Again, I'm Katina Horton, the Love and Freedom Toxic Relationship Recovery Coach. I love you, family. Be blessed.
There was a son, he was devoured by earth. There was a God, they call him the Father. And there was a means to make a valley with grace out of this hole that I've dug for me. He made a valley of grace where things would change, and maybe they'd take up the cross high again. The valley of grace was never the same after he had died. The love that refines. There's no sense in trying to do it on my own. He gave more than I could have known. He turned those valleys into places to learn instead of burn and perish away. And nights never so cold without his grace. How could I say that I've seen the world from his great love? How could I know what he could love? How would I've seen what he had in store for me if I didn't give up and let him be my valley of grace, where things would change and maybe they'd take up the cross high again. The valley of grace never was the same after he had died. The love that refines. sharing all of that. You took the price to give me that life, and now it's never gonna fade away. When I see I need more of him, he whispers the sweetest of mercies upon my ears, and I won't go back the way it was again, again, again. And now a valley of grace where things would change. I've seen the light, so